Chodesh Tov. We are now in the second day of Rosh Chodesh Tammuz, and Tammuz is a difficult month in Jewish history, beginning from when the Israelites left Egypt and they were in the desert and they were waiting at the bottom of Mount Sinai for Moshe to bring down the Torah. And they believed, erroneously so, that Moshe was late in coming down, and they coerced Aaron to make for them the golden calf. Huge sin. Also, Tammuz is the beginning of the destruction of our temple and all sorts of unfortunate things that happened in our history in this month. But so the month of Tammuz is connected, every month is connected with a sense, and the month of Tammuz is connected to the sense of sight, which I want to talk about briefly in this video. Now, this week's Parsha that we're reading in Israel is Parshat Chukat. And in Parshat Chukat, I really think ties very well with this whole concept that sight is perception, how we perceive things. And how we perceive things has a monumental effect on us, on people around us, and the outcome of events in our life. And I think Moshe is the greatest example of this. So let's take a quick look at Moshe and his life and his journey until we get to Parshat Chukat, which is this week. Moshe, when he was confronted by God in the burning bush, and God had told him to be the leader and to take the people out of Egypt, Moshe did not want to do this. He argued as much as he could to get out of it. But God had told him that you're going to go, you're going to be the leader, say this and this to the people, and they'll believe you and you'll take them out. And Moshe, after the fact, says, no, they won't believe. They're not going to believe in me. And I don't think that that's so hard to understand. Look, Moshe was only young. He only spent his formative years in Egypt, and that was in the house of Paro, not amongst his people. And then for about 60 years, he was living in the desert in Midian with his father-in-law Yitro and his wife, disconnected from the Israelites. So if he was thinking they wouldn't accept me as leader, I think all of us would think that. Why would we think that they would accept him as leader? But, big but, God said, he heard it from the mouth of God, who knows what is, was, and will be, that they will listen, they will believe. And if God says it, it was his job to step back, take a deep breath, and say, okay, he doesn't really have a choice in the matter. And if God says that they'll believe, they'll believe. Now, God did not punish him for that. I think God understood, and God always holds things in abeyance, to let people room for growth. But I think that as great as Moshe was, and Moshe's one of the greatest men that ever lived, greatest man that ever will live, nobody spoke to God like Moshe spoke to God. But he had one Achilles heel, and that was he didn't have faith in the people, in the people's faith, in the people's faith in him, and the people's faith in God. And we see that throughout the narrative, in all the stories. And his perception that the fact that the people were not believers, that they didn't have faith, they weren't a people of faith, came across because when we think something, we automatically exude it in how we speak and what we say and what we don't say, how we choose everything that we do based on what we believe. And then that affects the outcome. And that's what happened with Moshe. I'd like to read you something that, let me find it. I don't know what I did with it. 1 second. Okay, I found it. I want to read you something that a Facebook friend of mine, Mark Kirschbaum, wrote on this, not on this week's Parsha, actually it's in Parshat Shlach when he's talking about the sin of the spies. And he talks about how perception affects reality, and how the spies weren't worthy to be the leaders because of how they perceived. And this is a quote from a long blog that he wrote that I suggest everybody reads. His Parsha blogs. They're genius. He's genius. And he says what the deficiency was in their gaze, thus also revealing why they were not the right leadership or people for entering the land. How you see determines the kind of society you will construct. It is worth noting the stress that the Baal Shem Tov placed on an active looking, in which even apparent sins and flaws of those around you must be read and interpreted in a positive manner. The judgments and conclusions you derive from the way you look upon the world are more determinative of what the world you will inhabit consists of. And if it appears all bad, it will be all bad. If your world and all in it are beautiful, the world you inhabit will perhaps be so in a corresponding manner. So I love this. This is one of the things that I believe in so strongly is, I mean, you can say self-fulfilling prophecy. I don't really think that that's as large as the idea, because when we believe something, we really, everything that we do is affected around us, as Mark said. And look at this. When Moshe, even before Matan Torah, when Yitro says Yitro heard all that God had done for the nation, and he came to the mountain, and he comes to Moshe and he says, when he sees that Moshe's sitting before the people all day and all night in judgment, he says, what are you doing to these people? It's an interesting thing, right? What are you doing to these people? What he's trying to help them. He's like, they want to, know what God thinks. So they're trying to live their lives, and he's giving them the judgments. And what Yitro was, I think, trying to say is, you're gonna not just destroy yourself, which obviously is not something one person can handle doing all the time by micromanaging a whole entire nation, but you're destroying the people, because the people, they have talents and abilities, and they should be using them. You have to, and then he says point to point tens and hundreds and thousands to make a hierarchy system for the people to go to for advice, for counsel. And especially in those days with the tribes and the people who live with the people, they know, they have a connection, they have talents and abilities to deal with the people and to bring out the best of their people, through their own gifts and their own knowledge of people, events, of things, and that Moshe should have nurtured that and created that in them. Give them amunah, give them faith, not just in God and in Moshe as a leader, by doing everything that God told him, taking out of the land, but as a leader in terms of bringing out the best in the leaders in the nation, in each person in the nation. And that every time we see that the nation came with complaints and problems, Moshe, he's great. He had a connection with God, but he would go straight to God and fall on his face and pray to God, because he did love and care for the people. But we don't see incidences of him kind of doing like what Kalev did, right? Telling people we can do this, we got this, we believe in God because of what God did, and like instill faith and get that out of the people. And what happened was in Parshat Chukat, when we have, after Miriam had passed away, and so the Mei Meriva, the well dried up and they didn't have any water, then the people complained to Moshe, and God told Moshe to speak, and Aaron to speak to the rock and bring forth water. And Moshe didn't. What did Moshe do? He hit the rock. And what happens after he hit the rock twice and water gushed forth from the rock? So it doesn't really seem like a sin, especially given the fact that the first time that the Jews didn't have water many, many years ago, God told Moshe to hit the rock and bring forth water. So what would he think? Maybe, of course, he would think you hit the rock and bring forth water. But that was the command then. That wasn't the command now. And if Moshe was in tune with the people and who they were and how to bring out the most of them, he would have noticed this is not the same generation. This was 38 years later. The older generation had already mostly died out, um, and their complaint about not having water wasn't even the same complaint as their parents had complained. Their parents, when they complained, they said, what'd you do? You brought me out to kill me and my family, and we want to go back. They were very egocentric. They don't mention God. They just were full of fear. But in this incident, when the people come to Moshe, they come and they don't talk about me. They talk about us, the congregation. They talk about God. They have faith in God. They're speaking about God. They're speaking about the nation. They just wanted water. They were thirsty. It's a legitimate request. And when God said to speak to the rock, it was a moment of opportunity for Moshe to make a groundbreaking speech to bring out their faith, their emunah, their potential in themselves, in God, in Moshe, in the journey, what's about to happen. This is a pivotal moment. They're about to go into the land of Israel. God wants them to go with strength, with faith. That would make them a force that could not be beaten. If you have faith in what you're doing and God behind you, forget about it. So that's what God really wanted. And Moshe missed that opportunity. And so when people say that when God, after Moshe hit the rock twice and water gushed forth from the rock, and Hashem says, you are not going to be going into the land. And he said, why? Exact words. Let's see if I can find it. He said, you didn't sanctify, you didn't believe in me to sanctify me in the eyes of the nation. So what does that mean? You didn't have faith in me? Moshe Rabbeinu, seriously, no person had more faith in God than Moshe Rabbeinu. So seriously, what does that mean? But what he's saying is there was God. Moshe did have more faith than anyone else. Moshe was closer to God than anyone else. But that mission that God was sending on from the very, very beginning, when he said the people will believe, bring that out in them. That Moshe should have that faith of the God in all of them, that they all have that connection, and it just needs to be accessed. It just needs to be brought out. And that was the job that God wanted out of Moshe for the people going into the land. Because in order for the people to inhabit the land and to do it successfully, they need that faith in themselves, in God, and in their leader. That's what they needed. And Moshe's job here was finished because he sealed it. He didn't, not only did he not speak to the rock, he didn't even bring up God's name. He said, are we going to bring forth water from this rock? It was him and Aaron standing there, no mention of God. And he calls them, listen, ye rebels, and calls them rebels instead of positive reinforcement, which we all know is better than negative reinforcement. He focuses on a perception of yesteryear from their parents and makes them suffer for the sin of their parents when they're not doing a recurring sin of their parents. They've shown growth. They've shown faith in God. They've shown the fact that they see themselves as a kahila, as a community, as a congregation. And that potential that Moshe had at that moment was forever lost when he hit the rock. You can't go backward, and you can't recapture a moment like that was lost. And so the fact that he did not go into the land is because his job here was done. His job here was done, and he led and he got close to God, and he did phenomenal things, and nobody wants to take that away. I certainly don't want to. But I think that it's necessary for us to understand what really went on here in terms of how we can proceed in life and how we can go on. That's why I was talking about Tammuz. I used to go into Tammuz as a month of trepidation with fear for bad things that could happen. I don't do that this year. And I'll tell you why. Because if I fear that something bad will happen, if I live with something looming over me, it's gonna be bad that's gonna happen. But if I say, you know what? everything has a dual purpose. There's the fire, this Aish, this is a month where I can either take that sight and see things in negative and cause more negativity and keep that cycle going for our people, or I can say, I'm going to see the potential in our failings and why we failed and understand it and try and do better for myself and the people around me. And I'm going to try and look at the positive, and that when people come with an issue, try to look at what they have within them to overcome that and focus on that and say, well, you have this ability and you can make better things happen. If you just, take the proper steps and don't see things doom and see the positivity, then life can be good.